Good afternoon and welcome to the News Roundup for Friday, October 24th, 2025. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. The well's about to run dry. The Democratic-led government shutdown now threatening to pull the plug on a number of critical federal food assistance programs, which millions of Americans rely upon to get their daily meals. Blatant gerrymandering. More and more states all across the country now redrawing their congressional maps in order to gain the advantage prior to next year's pivotal midterm elections. And the leaders of Communist China praising their nation's long-term vision while slamming the U.S. as an out-of-control failure. No kidding. Also, President Trump heading to Asia for a variety of critical meetings with global leaders. And this, an ambitious investor plunking down $250,000 to buy nearly 28 tons of coins. We'll tell you why he's betting on getting his 5 cents worth. All this and more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin here. The ongoing shutdown of the federal government is now just days away from causing a significant disruption to our nation's widely used food stamps program. So this could drastically impact the daily lives of nearly 42 million Americans. The Department of Agriculture, we know them as the USDA, now sounding the alarm and warning state agencies throughout the country that by the end of next week, all the funds which are allocated for that type of federal food assistance are expected to run completely dry. At that moment, all the people who rely upon our nation's SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, they're in grave danger of not receiving any kind of government food aid at all. Additionally, another program which helps provide essentials to millions of pregnant women and young children, they will also face drastic shortfalls. The USDA says that Democrats in the Senate, who are gumming up the works by refusing to pass that short-term funding bill, are now facing a critical choice. Either continue to hold out for subsidies, which will provide health care for illegal immigrants, or reopen the government so millions of vulnerable Americans can put food on the table. It's all pretty basic. In the meantime, more than 24 states are already alerting their citizens about the upcoming challenges their food programs are facing, including one state, Virginia, which recently declared a state of emergency regarding that issue. One food expert says right now it costs the government about $8 billion a month to fund the food stamps program nationwide. And so, Republicans, they're not complaining about spending all that dough on a social program. But the Democrats, they've got to open up the government before the government can feed the people in need. Democrats calling for President Trump to tap into the government's $5 billion food stamp contingency fund to pick up some of the program's tab for November. And that's basically just a Band-Aid. They claim, however, that right now the administration refuses to use any of those emergency reserves because they'd rather starve the American people. That's their narrative. But look, nothing more than Democrats passing the buck. That reserve isn't even enough to cover one regular month of spending on that program. They're toying with you. And really, it's just disgusting. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. For those who are down and out, struggling and legitimately dependent upon that SNAP program to feed themselves and their families, this is downright evil. It's evil, and we should have never come to the point where our fellow Americans could go hungry because Chuck Schumer has dug himself into a hole that he cannot get himself out of. For now, the hits, they just keep on coming as we meander our way through the fourth week of the big government shutdown, a shutdown owned, operated, and mismanaged by that guy, Chuck Schumer. Things are only getting progressively worse. Tons of federal employees have been laid off, furloughed, or fired. Military personnel, the people who guard our country, they're still getting paid, but we don't know for how much longer. Scores of essential government employees still on the job, but they're not getting paid. And a large number of additional government services, they've been disrupted. Now, just like the Grinch who stole Christmas, Chuck and company are taking the milk, butter, and eggs out of the ice boxes of American homes. Vegetables, meat, poultry, fish, forget about it. And the kiddies, they'll have to go to school without their morning bowl of Frosted Flakes. Keeping the government closed, that's a great way to play chicken with the Trump administration. But you're playing a game you can't win. Families with children could go hungry, and what you're doing is inexcusable. Tell us what you think, and we're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. I'm hungering for comments, so producer Davey joining the program to tell us who's up first. And Davey, what are folks saying about this one?
Okay, Bill, we start with Daniel, who's writing to us today from New York City.
Daniel, great to hear from you. Share your thoughts, sir.
He says, funny how the GOP complains about food stamps, but not about health care. Why don't poor people just buy their own food?
We're not complaining about food stamps. We're more than willing to dole out $8 billion a month in food stamp benefits, but we can't do it because the Democrats have shut the government down. Daniel, you missed the point. David, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, we have Richard from Louisville, Kentucky checking in.
Talk to us, Rich.
He says, another example of how the Dems don't give a hoot about anyone but themselves.
Yeah.
They're willing to let people starve to prove a point, even if they're wrong.
Yeah, Republicans are more than willing and able to talk, negotiate, sit down, do business, but the Democrats are too afraid of their own shadow to sit down and strike a deal. You know, for the 42 million Americans who could lose their SNAP benefits, remember everything you're going through right now when you visit the polls during the midterm elections, and they're coming up in absolutely no time at all. All right, change things up just a bit now. Turn our attention to the growing number of partisan lawmakers all across the country who are currently redrawing congressional maps within their states, all in order to gain critical seats for their preferred political party in next year's midterm election. Republicans in North Carolina, they're becoming the most recent legislature to join the list by redrawing the map in the Tar Heel state to greatly improve their chances in a single battleground district that formerly leaned toward the Democrats. Yeah, the fix is in. Republican state lawmakers in Missouri also recently reconfigured their congressional districts in order to pick up just one seat. And in this case, they've just redrawn the map to split up a former Democratic district in Kansas City and swing it heavily in favor of the GOP. Now, ordinarily, congressional maps, they are redrawn every 10 years following the release of the official U.S. Census. However, President Trump kicked off this unprecedented round of off-year redistricting efforts by urging Republicans in Texas to successfully kind of figure out a way to scratch out a handful of additional seats for the GOP. You know, a short time later, that guy, yep, you know who this is, California Governor Gavin Newsom, he upped the ante and launched a campaign to add a bunch of Democratic seats by redrawing a number of congressional districts throughout his golden states. If you don't know a lot about that guy, Gavin Newsom, yeah, he's slick, and he's cheesy, and he's greasy. In the meantime, lawmakers in several other states now considering the potential of changing their maps to gain seats for the party of their choice, and those states include Florida and Indiana for the Republicans, as well as New York and Virginia for the Democrats, among others. Kind of like a political board game, political monopoly, and it's all made for grown-ups. And I say to all participants, go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You know, as one legal expert points out, although both parties are trying heavily to rig districts in their own favor, the actual voting outcome in each of those areas remains completely up in the air. They say technology can help make accurate predictions, but in the end, voters are still likely to make up their own minds. A final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. You know, this whole redistricting thing, it's a scam, and each and every one of us is being played like political pawns in a congressional chess match. A match worth power and control. That's all it's about. It doesn't really matter who started the game. What matters is that more and more players, they are beginning to participate, and because the game is rigged, nobody really wins. Not fairly, anyway. You know, regardless of their party affiliation, when state governors and lawmakers grab hold of their legislative Crayola crayons, cyan, forest green, navy blue, and all the rest, they begin coloring outside the lines. Then they're no longer serving their individual states. Instead, they're serving only the individuals aligned with their party, and their end game is to clearly take control of Congress. It's bad politicking at its worst, and right now, we need a grown-up in the room to step in, to call foul, issue a timeout for those who are rigging the program, and stop them from hijacking the vote. That's what this is. It's hijacking the vote. Regardless of who began this debacle, each of us should stand up, speak out, and demand more and better from our elected representatives. Now, tell us what you're thinking about the great redistricting scam. And we're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. This bothers me, Davey, and what are folks saying?
Yeah, it sounds like it does bother you, Bill. Okay, we have Bill in We have Barney in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Hello,
in, Bill.
Bill, Barney, Bill. What are you thinking?
Barney says this gerrymandering nonsense is like playing a game with cheaters who change the rules whenever they don't win.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. It's kind of like a monopoly game for grown-ups. Everybody is cheating. They're cheating on both sides. We need to put an end to it right away. It did start with Donald Trump down Texas way and then down California way. Governor Newsom had to fight back. Instead of taking the Trump administration to task, maybe using the courts to rectify a problem, all Governor Newsom did was kind of make the problem much worse, much bigger, and now everybody's glomming on. It's becoming a very disturbing national game. All right, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, we have another message here from Betty in Tampa, Florida.
Hiya, Betty.
She says the Republicans have to do everything in their power to add seats. They know if they don't, they'll lose in a landslide.
No, not at all. Republicans have no need to be concerned about losing seats. The midterms will be here in a jiffy, and voters will remember what the Democrats did by shutting down the federal government. Democrats, they have no chance of scoring a majority. This thing is all wrapped up. The Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot. We'll switch things up just a bit now, turn our sights to China, where leaders of the repressive communist regime are ramping up their provocative rhetoric, insulting our entire country, and taking cheap potshots at the USA. Really? So, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has just finished holding a major powwow concerning their big 5-year economic plan for the future. And as a result, China is now bragging that while we're mired in what they call short-sighted democracy, goofy democracy, they're taking a much more successful long-term approach, rapidly gaining ground on the West and marching steadily in the right direction. Marching to the beat of a communist drum. The CCP says that America's strength is nothing more than an illusion and a fragile myth. They go on to mock President Trump, accuse our country of being a failed state, and even claim that as a nation, we're currently dying from within. Well, we're not exactly dying from within or otherwise, but even if we were, at least we don't detain people and steal their internal organs. In your face, China. Now, if that's not enough, the communist regime fans the flames even higher by mocking our government shutdown, arguing that our country is totally out of control, and pointing to the recent No Kings protests as an example of how our nation is in utter disarray. Well, apparently they didn't get the memo. That No Kings protest, that was about the Los Angeles Kings, the big hockey team. They got that one entirely wrong. Now, the CCP claims the unpredictability of the U.S. political system casts a dark shadow over world peace while hindering development throughout the entire world. Therefore, they claim that China is the planet's true leader, and they're pointing to their new 5-year plan as proof. In my estimation, they've been dipping a little bit too deeply into the, I hope I say this right, Baijio. Engineer Jamie, did I say that right? Baijio. That's kind of a fancy cocktail over there in China. The CCP's economic blueprint takes some lofty steps meant to improve China's domestic technology sector, limit the impact of Western export controls, and play up their competitive advantages over the U.S. A final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Somebody recently asked a big-time dictator named Xi Jinping, "Where do you see your country in a handful of years, son?" And I dig the response. Here's what Xi and his cohorts have to say, and it sounds pretty okay the way I see it. Listen carefully, and you'll come to admire China's lofty 5-year plan. They're going to doll up the economy, ramp up their tech base, continue to build out their military. Of course, that means more of those goofy, globally destructive bombs of the nuclear variety, and we know about those fancy subs, too. They want to focus a bit more on their national power while asserting their big boy status on the global stage. Oh, yeah, and they say they're bigger and better than the U.S. It's actually a whole bunch more, but easy on the hype because we don't want to come off sounding like China's cheerleader. By the way, here's that little part of China's 5-year plan which they made no reference to. They left it out. Didn't appear in the final draft. They didn't talk about perhaps bringing an end to mass arbitrary detention, forced labor, forced sterilization, mass surveillance, and religious and cultural repression. They conveniently left that part out. Producer Davey, I think they call that the convenient truth. Yes?
Oh, Bill, they left all that stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah, they also left out the part about how they might want to address some additional concerns with regard to religious control, censorship, forced organ harvesting, and all the rest. It's great for China's leadership to share their 5-year plan with all of their global fans while they beat up on the USA. But they really ought to share the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey said all those years ago. And while they climb the ladder of global superiority, clue everybody in with regard to their plans on addressing their many human rights abuses. Your thoughts and comments on China's big 5-year agenda. Drop us a note. We're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. They're getting on my nerves, Davey, those folks down in China. And what are folks saying?
Well, you're not alone, Bill.
Yeah.
We start with Gary from Durham, North Carolina.
Gary, what's on your mind?
He says the CCP has basically declared war on the freedom-loving people of the West.
Yeah.
Now they're making it personal, and it's time to cut them off forever.
Yeah, not just on the West, but on their own neighbors. They've made those advances toward Taiwan. They've been very clear. They want to take Taiwan, and perhaps as early as 2027. So they are threatening the West. They're threatening their next-door neighbors as well. I appreciate you checking in. And, Davey, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, we have a message here from May in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
May I learn what's on your mind, May? Talk to us.
She says, "What more do you need to know? Communist China is our enemy.
Yeah.
No more deals.
They're the enemy to pretty much everybody in the free world. It's great that China wants to build, grow, and expand. But look, national conquest at the expense of human rights and basic freedoms. It's a proven recipe for disaster. And in the end, China cannot and will not succeed. Now, some additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, President Trump now crossing the Pacific and heading for a high-stakes week-long trip in Asia. And during his stay, the leader of the free world is planning to meet with a number of heads of state, including China's President Xi Jinping and possibly, quite possibly, even North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Moving along, the annual Social Security cost of living adjustment has just been announced, and it should come as a bit of a welcome news for the program's beneficiaries, who are now set to receive a nice bump of just under 3% to their monthly retirement checks. They're going to get a raise. And turning now to our government's efforts to safeguard our cities, President Trump saying he's calling a halt to his plans to deploy National Guard troops to protect the people of San Francisco, at least for the time being. Says before he takes any further action, he's given the city a chance to clean up the current mess all on their own. You take care of that. We got other things to take care of. We got bigger fish to fry, still trying to build out that fancy White House ballroom. Now, scooting along to the world of business and taking a quick glance at a couple of stories currently making waves in finance, in trade, and more. Leading off, Target downsizing, eliminating 1,800 corporate-level jobs. The struggling retail giant saying they're making the move to streamline their operations and that most of those cuts will be in their Minneapolis headquarters. You know, you got to love those big cuts when they arrive just in time for the big holidays. Thanks, Target. And turning now to some news concerning EVs. A car maker in China claiming they've just developed a revolutionary type of battery which can more than double the current range of electric vehicles. However, due to the current export controls, those batteries, unfortunately, they may never be sold outside of the communist country. Can't get them here. Great. Thanks a bunch. Now it's back to Radio Shack for me. You ever go to Radio Shack, Davey?
Oh, yeah. I love Radio Shack, Bill.
Are you a member of that Battery of the Month Club? You know about that one?
No. What's that deal, Bill?
That's a little card that you don't have to buy anything. You give you a little card, and every month you come in, they stamp it, and they give you a battery of your choice, an A, AA, AAA, a D-cell battery, whatever you want. Not one of those fancy ones in China that'll get you 800 miles on a charge, but one of those 39-cent batteries, free of charge, and you got to love that, right?
Oh, absolutely. You take what you can get, right?
Take what you can get in this economy. Absolutely. And moving along, another ominous warning for the U.S. economy. A major subprime lender that provides auto financing nationwide. Yeah, they just filed for bankruptcy. That company handed out loans to a number of people with questionable credit ratings. Yeah, their failure kind of sparking comparisons to the financial crisis of 2008.
Hey, there's a bubble.
I remember that big meltdown. That was not pleasant. And now time for a quick gander at the lighter side of news. And today, an American investor just plunked down $250,000 in cash to buy 5 million nickels. And he's making a bold bet that the metal which makes up those coins will soon be worth a whole lot more than just 5 cents a pop. Well, that's a dumb bet. The investor says that while most people would call him insane, he thinks that sooner or later the U.S. Mint is going to cheapen the quality of the material in the nickels, and that as a result, he says he's going to make some good coin on his purchase. Not so much. Right now, the current value of a nickel, actually 6 cents, so he says he's ahead of the game a little bit. However, the investor's haul weighs nearly 28 tons, so he's got to pay for a place to store all of his dough. Well, there goes all your profits, brain surgeon. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has already pulled the plug on the mint's production of pennies, which now cost nearly 4 cents each to make. You know, this truly is an amazing story. And so you know, there's actually a scientific term for people who collect too many nickels, and they're called nickelectors. Nickel collectors. Nickelectors. It makes sense. Yeah, I've done a great deal of study into nickelectoring, and some years back, I even published a best-selling book called Nickelectoring for Dummies. Dave, you ever read Nickelectoring for Dummies?
Oh, yeah, Bill. Great read. Fantastic book. Yeah. It's probably your best book yet.
Oh, thank you very much. Sells for $29.95, which is roughly about 599 nickels. Now, this particular nickelector, he gets it wrong when he says most people would call me insane. That's not correct. And to be clear, everyone is calling him insane. Not most people, everyone. He'll never make a nickel off this deal. It's a dumb idea, and his money would have been more well invested in Enron stock, 8-track tapes, or even President Kamala Harris bumper stickers. Hey, Davey.
Yeah, Bill, what's up?
Kamala Harris bumper stickers. Too soon?
Yeah, Bill, I think that's probably a little bit too soon.
All right, your thoughts on nickel lecturing as a hobby, an investment, or whatever. We don't judge. Drop us a note, and we're at newsroundupwithbill@gmail.com. Davey, what are folks saying about this nickel lector?
Well, Bill, a lot of people, believe it or not, they're checking in with us. We have Mario from Chicago, Illinois.
Mario, share your thoughts with us. Nickel for
He
your thoughts.
says that nickel guy is a genius.
Eh.
They're already worth more than he paid for them, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, but if you're paying for storage for $250,000 worth of nickels, you have a little bit of profit, and you're going to spend it all on the store. It doesn't make any sense. He's not making any money. He's losing money on the deal. Stop with this genius nonsense. All right, David, who's up next?
Okay, Bill, here's Jim the fireman, he says, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
What's on your mind, Jim?
He says he's not the first guy who's tried a gimmick like that. Yeah. If you got that kind of money and that's what you choose to do with it, most people root for you to fail.
Yeah, you can make maybe a half of 1% in a savings account and still make more money than you would on investing in nickels. This makes absolutely no sense. It's a waste of time. Maybe it's a social media experiment to get people to talk about him. And look at us. We're talking about him. All right, one more, and we got to bust out because it's Friday.
Okay, Bill, here's one from Phyllis in Grand Island, Nebraska.
What's on your mind, Phyllis?
She says that penny pincher would have been better off buying pennies.
Yeah. And pennies, they're going to stop production when, Davey? Or have they already done that?
I think their last round is now, Bill. They already stopped ordering the supplies, and they're losing money head over heels.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's the writing is on the wall.
Kind of odd for our federal government to actually do something and lose money. And now it's time for us to call it a wrap on the Aloha Friday edition of the Big News Roundup. And before we go, as we do each and every day right here on the program, we share with you a very notable quote. And in honor of the World Series, these words of wisdom come to us today from Hammerin' Hank Aaron, who said, "Failure is part of success." Aaron was an American baseball player who played in the major leagues for 23 outstanding seasons, and during his legendary career, he shattered Babe Ruth's long-standing record for most home runs in a career. And he was such a big star in baseball, Davey, they even named a candy bar after him called the Baby Ruth Candy Bar.
Well, Bill, you got part of that right, but it wasn't called Baby Ruth. His candy bar was called O. Henry.
Oh, yeah. Now I remember. And now it is time for us to scoot on out of here for the weekend. But before we bail out, don't forget the News Roundup motto. Ask not what your podcast can do for you. Ask what you can do for your podcast. What can you do? You simply hit subscribe. That way you never miss a single episode. And now it does look like our time is officially up, so have an awesome day today. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the World Series. Please stay safe. Let's all continue to watch out for one another. And Engineer Jamie, let's dim the lights, fade to black, and we'll see you right back here on Monday afternoon.